This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the Young Wealth Show, where you'll truly learn how to make, spend, and invest money for an awesome life. Get the real-life stuff that wasn't part of your school curriculum. Young Wealth gives you innovative new ways of dealing with your finances, as well as the skills and tools you're going to need to survive and be successful out on your own. Let the Young Wealth Show be your GPS to take you from clueless to clued in. Here's your host, Jason Hartman, with Young Wealth.
It's my pleasure to welcome a returning guest back to the show, and that is Blake J. Harris. He's a New York Times best-selling author of Console Wars, Sega, Nintendo, and the Battle That Defined a Generation. Now, we're not talking about that today. We're talking about his new book, The History of the Future, about Oculus, Facebook, and the revolution that swept virtual reality. Interesting that he says swept in past tense. We'll see what he says about that. He's got a new TV series out, published by Legendary Pictures with Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, and Scott Rudin, and executive producer, Sony's feature film adaptation of Console Wars. I think this should be an interesting talk. The future ain't what it used to be, as they say. Blake, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. I'm busy thinking about the future, and you're spot on. It ain't what it used to be. It's changing every day.
Yeah, that's for sure, as Yogi Berra famously said. It's interesting, as I noted in your intro, that you put in past tense the revolution that swept virtual reality. I don't even think we've started the revolution yet, have we?
Oh, it's an interesting observation. No one's asked me about that, and it was by design a bit. Obviously, virtual reality and augmented reality headsets are not ubiquitous at all right now, so it would be premature to say that we've succeeded in this revolution. But I do think that there was such an energy and fervor around Oculus, their Kickstarter in 2012, and the excitement around gaming and virtual reality, that it did feel like a revolution that has already happened and, of course, set a lot of things into motion that hopefully will be leading to bearing fruits over the next few years. But to me, it did feel like there was a special time for virtual reality between 2012 and 2016 that has come to an end. Not the end of virtual reality, but that phase of the revolution did feel like it was a self-contained story.
So, Blake, one of the possibly most amazing things is how virtual reality, Oculus Rift, Facebook, it will change the way we socialize. It will change the way we date. It will change the way we meet people, the way we have business meetings. Wow. It's hugely significant, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned that the reason I felt that virtual reality revolution from 2012 to 2016 was sort of this self-contained thing was because it really was very gaming oriented. Oculus was founded in 2012, and their tagline, their mission was actually to help people step into the game. And then in 2014, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook acquired Oculus for $3 billion, and it was for all of the reasons that you're describing: the future of education, the future of training, the future of productivity, the future of dating. And it really does have the potential to do all of those things in ways that ways that we can imagine, some ways that we cannot. But really, it comes down to this idea that was such a significant part of what the guys at Oculus were building towards, which was presence, to feel like you are actually somewhere else when really physically you're in the same place wearing a headset. And the potential of that, I think one of the simplest ways to put it for people who haven't tried a headset is to just think maybe of virtual reality as like the next iteration from phone calls to Skype to virtual reality interactions, where this conversation could be happening virtually in a few years and we'll actually feel like we're together in this other space.
Yeah, it's really weird to think of it. And, we left out one huge industry that used to be the biggest industry online before social media. And that's, I say it, but the adult industry, right? And
yes.
And they always, from what I understand, are kind of the leaders in pushing these technologies because the more, I guess, rich media, right? That it's
right.
And virtual reality is certainly another step toward the richness, if you will, of the media, right? right? It's pretty fascinating. It'll also impact, and I didn't say it, we have so many real estate investors listening, but the way we look at properties. Peter Diamandis, and I think he's wrong about this, but, it's interesting. I mean, it'll have an impact. There's no question. I just don't think it'll be a all or nothing impact like the way he was sort of couching it. He was talking about how realtors won't have a job anymore, because you don't need to go show a house. You can just show it through virtual reality. You have the camera people go through the house once with whatever virtual gear they need, and then you could just tour it yourself from any computer or mobile device, right?
I mean, conceptually, yes. And I do think that, as we already know, virtual reality is being used by architecture firms for building houses or building properties and showing properties, and also by some real estate agents. But I don't necessarily see it as such a doom and gloom scenario, because I feel like you could say the same about houses today. The house exists, someone could go to it, but we are humans, and it is nice to have a guide. It is nice to have an expert by our side, someone who can help us see the vision further and answer questions. So I do imagine that will probably be a bigger part of real estate, and it'll change the way that we interface with real estate agents and brokers and with these properties.
Sure. So what do we have now? I'm usually a pretty early adopter with technology. I probably spend too much money that I shouldn't, but I don't have a virtual reality headset. I haven't even really looked at them much. What does the consumer have available to them now? Not only in the hardware, and, what's the price of it, and what's the right thing to buy or not buy. But, in terms of what they can actually use it for, what videos are available, or what can you do with it?
It's a great question. And it's particularly interesting because I spent 4 years working on this book. So I really started working on it in 2015, 2016. This was shortly after Facebook's big acquisition of Oculus. And around that time, during the course of my research, I obtained thousands of internal documents and emails, and Mark Zuckerberg had mentioned that he envisioned that 5 years from now, there would be 50 to 100 million of these headsets out there being used. And it is almost literally 5 years from that acquisition, and we have nowhere near
Didn't
that.
quite happen, yeah. But
yeah.
A lot of these prognosticators, they're not wrong. They're just early.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. But in terms of what we do have 7 million virtual reality headsets out there. And to use those, though, I think 4 million of them are being used connected to a PC, and 3 million are being used connected to PlayStation 4. So a long way of saying that all 7 million of those are tethered to a computer or a game console. And so, I think the future of virtual reality, the one that is going to make, you buy a headset or more interested in buying one, or my mom or my brother, is an untethered standalone experience, which hopefully could be affordable for a few $100s. And Oculus and Facebook are putting out a headset like that called the Oculus Quest in a couple of months. It's going to be the first affordable headset that does that. And as with so many things over the course of my 4 years working on this is the thing that they think is going to finally make VR take off. It remains to be seen. I think it's going to be a slow burn either way, but at least it moves us in that right direction where it would be affordable and accessible to you.
Yeah, you talk about affordability, and I mean, I remember literally the last time I looked up Oculus Rift headset, and it was about $650.
Yes.
And now I'm looking at it right now, this moment, it's $349. It's probably better than that other version too, I'm guessing. But what's the kind of price point that you consider affordable? What are they saying what the Quest will cost?
The Quest is going to cost $400, which is still expensive, of course. That's still expensive. But I think that we all sort of understand that this is generation one, and Facebook wants this to be in our hands. They are a software company more than a hardware company. So their goal is to get it out there and to drive the price down. But I think that one of the things that's interesting is that, to me, this story is about virtual reality. But what interested me as a writer was always sort of this American dream, starting a business story that is universal in that respect. Mm-hmm. When Oculus first came onto the scene in 2012 with a headset invented by founder Palmer Luckey, the major proposition was that this was a $300 headset. And then you flash forward a few years to when they actually launched it, and it was $600. I'm sure that anyone who's run a business knows that stuff like that happens, that you keep making compromises or keep upgrading. But I do think that at some point you maybe sort of lose sight of your original mission. And that is part of what happened with Oculus, and maybe why it is not as ubiquitous as we would want today. But I think that over the next few years, it will come down to a price point of about $200, which is, that's still a lot of money.
Yeah,
but it's probably something
really,
that we can afford.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What else is out there? I mean, is the Facebook Oculus cartel and I'm calling it a cartel because I'm not a Facebook fan. I mean, I use it all the time, but I have my gripes about the way it's being run for sure, and all of these big tech platforms scare the heck out of me in many ways. But anyway,
that's good. They should.
Yeah,
I went into this book with no particular gripe against them or strong opinion, but I definitely left very concerned about Facebook and the future of these big tech companies. So I'm glad to hear that you're suspicious.
Oh, I'm extremely suspicious. I think they are way too big and powerful, and they're abusing us in so many ways. But that's a whole nother discussion for another day. Who else is there? Who's standing in line? Like, Oculus is clearly going to be the leader, at least, initially. Who's the second place?
So second place right now is HTC. They have a partnership with the game company Valve, which is best known for Steam and Steam's hundreds of millions of PC gamer user distribution network. They have actually been very competitive with Oculus and have, for the most part, been a market leader due to a lot of missteps and mistakes by Oculus and Facebook over the years. But to your point, Facebook has 2 billion users. They have a big war chest of money, and they do seem poised to lead, the next phase of the VR revolution if it were to come to pass. And then you have companies like Apple and like Microsoft and Google as well that have really put more of their efforts towards augmented reality, which is, more about the real world experience with virtual and computer generated objects overlaid on top of reality.
Right.
And it's kind of a good position for them to be in. We think of Apple as the pioneers of the smartphone industry, and they certainly were to a degree, but it helped them that BlackBerry came first and took a lot of the friction points away for them so that they can come in. And I think that we're probably poised for something like that here with virtual reality.
Yeah, very good point. Kind of jump to the next section, but I do want to go back for a moment and ask you about what can a consumer really do with it nowadays? What can they use it for?
The primary function is gaming. And it's interesting earlier that you mentioned the adult content industry and pornography, because during my years of working on this book, there was always this talk of finding the killer app. What is going to make you or me or anyone out there buy a $400 or $200 VR headset? And people have always talked about it in terms of some game or even some sort of social media platform. But to your point, historically with computing platforms, pornography has been one of those big killer apps. And so it's interesting, especially as we touch on that third rail topic of big tech and the impact they have on our society, that Facebook is so averse to adult content appearing or being used on these VR headsets. They make it as difficult as possible, which I think is hurting the spread of it to some degree.
It's probably hurting innovation and sales, but I'll say that I'm happy to hear Facebook's doing at least one sort of ethical thing, depending on where you come down on this.
No, you're totally right. And it's like, I don't mean to knock Facebook for
conscience.
Censorship there, but it sort of just goes to speak to Facebook really wants to curate this platform. I think that with PCs, for all the good and the bad that computers have brought us over the past 40 years, it is known to be very open, where you can pretty much do anything and have any sort of content out there. And again, there's good and bad to that. But I think the adult content in VR is already an area where we're seeing Facebook exercise their vision to cultivate this ecosystem.
It seems like the sort of second place big thing that really would be right after gaming would be social media, and not just social media, but another form of social media, which would be the dating sites. Because, wow, if people could meet and make like virtual reality phone calls, if you will, that would just be incredible. It's bad enough that nobody goes out anymore and everybody's sitting in front of their screen at home and cocooning. This is interesting because it's what the futurist Faith Popcorn predicted way back in the 90s. She called it cocooning, where people would just stay at home. And her impetus for that was literally this big technology. You ready? Don't freak out when I tell you about the technology that she built that cocooning theory around: home theater systems and big screen TVs. Now, those are totally commonplace, but they were really coming up then. She said, you won't need to go to the movies anymore, right?
Right.
But it became a lot more than that. But it seems like really the social media and the dating platforms would be huge. Also, I could see a huge use for job interviews. That would really be really efficient. A whole bunch of things, looking at houses, looking at cars. There's a million applications, obviously, but thoughts on that?
A good example of how it can be used in a social context is on Monday of this week, I did a book interview, basically a fireside chat in a virtual space hosted by a VR evangelist, and 50 people, quote unquote, attended virtually. And so after the Q&A, I could meet with some of them and talk to them. And so, it has that semblance of being more like a physical event as opposed to just IMing someone or text messaging someone. I think that part of the reason people haven't jumped full force into the dating and that sort of thing is because you do have this issue with the uncanny valley. There is not right now a perfect VR representation avatar of myself or of yourself. It's, it's still going to be a little gawky. So I think until they perfect that, it's probably going to, make people continue to date in the real world or via applications. But the one other thing that you have and that you really pointed on was the social media aspect. And if you recall, a big part of what made social media take off in the early or mid-aughts was the sharing of photos and of videos. And so with virtual reality, you have this ability to share 360-degree videos, meaning that you put a camera in the center of a room and let's say it's a child's birthday party and grandma can't be there. You can literally just record a full panorama and grandma could either be there in the moment, or she can relive the birthday party. For anyone who's tried one of those 360 experiences, it's kind of incredible because it's like walking through someone else's memory. Like you can walk and visit other parts of this experience that you didn't even go to in the first place.
It's pretty amazing. There will be a new thing. Well, we already have it to an extent, and I don't even know the name, but there's a buzzword for it. I can't remember. But there will be virtual reality tourism. That will happen,
Right.
What about the other senses? I mean, virtual reality plays on, the vast majority is your vision. It plays on your equilibrium, though, which I call the sixth sense. They talk about a sixth sense. We already have one. We already know about it. It's your equilibrium.
Right. Good point.
But, there are also a lot of sensors as far as body movement and touch. And, what about the other senses?
So we're still very early in that. I mean, I think smell is one that is discussed a lot. There's articles about it because it's perhaps the most fascinating. How do you create a seemingly infinite palette?
It's the most difficult. Smell is the most difficult one to recreate. Yeah.
So, I've seen experiments of trying to take the most common smells and recreate them. And that's going to be way into the future. But perhaps a workaround for that is where it gets into, scary or maybe empowering territory where you actually tap into the neural circuits. So maybe you're not actually smelling pizza, but you're triggering something in the brain that fires the same receptors that you would normally have when you smell pizza, and you'd feel like you're smelling pizza. That's sort of more like a Matrix type discussion. But that is probably going to take the longest. Like you said, smells is the hardest sense to recreate. Touch is probably going to be where we're focused for now. Getting our hands into virtual reality was a big win and big important thing early on.
Tell us how that works. Give us a hint as to how the touch and the motion and stuff works a little bit.
Sure. So, whenever I would talk to game developers or content developers, they would always say the first thing you do is in VR is you look down for your hands. And early on, there was no hands. It was a game controller. So bringing your hands into the experience with, Oculus's touch controllers or the wands from the HTC Vive at least gives you the feeling that your hands are there. The Quest is going to be doing finger tracking. So, you should be able to move all your digits and have full dexterity, but then there's also the actual sense of touch. And so that's going to probably be a matter of haptic feedback. There's some different options. We see some of that with video games today, but that's really the areas that these companies are exploring is to try to bring more haptics into VR.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, Blake, we got to wrap it up, but is there anything you want to share on the financial impact to the economy or these companies or I don't know. You just thought I'd throw it out there.
One thing that I think about a lot as I walk outside, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit noisy for the listeners, is, I look at all these stores or places where there used to be stores, and I do wonder what is going to be there in the future when so much of this can be done virtually. I mean, we've already seen this tectonic shift in retail due to Amazon and the internet. Now,
the retail apocalypse,
Exactly. And so what happens when you take that a step further? What happens when you and I decide to go out on a date or a double date and we can do that virtually instead of going to a Starbucks? Yeah. What is going to need to exist in the meat and potatoes real world? Hopefully people smarter than me are thinking of good options and ways that we can still interact physically. But it does make me wonder about that. And I guess from a financial standpoint, that's probably a win. We go to Amazon now and I pick out a jacket and then it's delivered to me. But what if I can just go in there now and go into an Amazon virtual dressing room and try it on? Yeah. And maybe it's a virtual jacket or maybe it's a real jacket. And that's really where the future of retail is going to be headed.
Or maybe you'll just order it on a 3D printer from your home,
Exactly.
Yeah, there's all. It's an amazing time to be alive. And, with this, it really speaks to the quote that I often repeat. It's my own quote. It just says, geography is less meaningful than it's ever been in human history. Geography is less meaningful than it's ever been in human history. It's still meaningful, but less than ever. And I think that's going to be more so, yeah. Give out your website. Of course, you can find the book in all the usual places.
And I'm on BlakeJHarris.com. You can see interviews about the making of the book and some excerpts on there. Thanks so much for having me on, Jason. This is great.
Hey, Blake, it was a pleasure. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.